Hi, I'm Luis Rodriguez, and I'm going to present to you Dieseland Coliseum, which is a game I worked on with my team called Super Scope for our project in DIG 4725C. I'm going to start with the character concept art that I worked on. Here's Doc, a character that I worked on in Adobe Illustrator. Started out with just rough shapes, and I ended up giving him some color. He was originally going to be one of our main playable characters. He'd be a healer. He ended up being repurposed in order to be an enemy, and without his legs, called the Highlander within our game. But here I put him in a pose that would follow the conventions for the modeler, make it easy for him to model according to how he wanted it. I gave him some color, some depth, give him a bit of an idea of how I envisioned the character, and also to distinguish the different shapes. Here I gave him profile views so they could have some idea of the depth and how the character would look. Here's the sketch for Mayhem. I just took a photo of the original sketch on paper, put it in the computer, Photoshop, and kind of cut him out from his background so I could go in and start editing him. I ended up just kind of duplicating his sides in order to get him more symmetrical, and then went in and gave color and added some armor to actually give the character some shape. And here's what we kind of finally ended up with for Mayhem, his look and his armor build, and what I based the model off of actually. Before I went in and modeled him, I just took out all the color and left the shapes and moved his arms outwards for the A pose so that I could have a better idea of how it would look. That was the original sketch. We'll check out the models now. Here was a start of Mayhem. It's just math, it's just like a rough shape. Took a little while, a little difficult to, kind of build it out. First time I'd done a human kind of figure in a long while. And here's starting to make some progress, moving down the body. Here's what we kind of ended up with for the final shape and build of Mayhem. The hands ended up being eliminated and just made it to more of a mitts, because for the purposes of the game it would fulfill what we needed, and it would save time, honestly. Built the character in Maya, obviously. Just used a background reference image of the front view I had done. This is actually a pose of him and him doing his punch after I had rigged him. We'll move to seeing the texture, the first texture I had done. It was like a 90% texture, just like a rough kind of look. I ended up moving that to being like this, kind of saturated it down. And this is kind of around that tone that he stayed. We'll see the final texture in a bit. Here's a preview of the rig that I built myself. I went through and did a lot of work on getting his own rig built. Unfortunately, due to lack of knowledge, I didn't skin some of the bones properly, and so the hips ended up being broken when I did animations. I didn't really have time to go back and fix it, so I ended up using Mixamo Auto Rigger, which was fine. It had some weird kind of problems when bringing it into Unity, or to Unreal, apologies, in which there would be multiple skeletons, and there was also extra physics assets which just had to be deleted and removed. And once those were deleted, we put them. He ran his animations fine, directly on the ground, and the multiple skeletons didn't have any kind of effect on performance for the game as far as we saw. I'll go over some of the animations that I did real quick. There's that was an idle animation that I did for the character. It ended up being an alt idle animation, and ended up being a lot more refined than that. Here's the very first run I did. Really rough, really mechanical. I ended up spending a lot of time trying to get it to look really good. This one isn't quite the finished product, but it's a lot closer, and it has a nice, a lot more of a gait, a lot more of a natural movement and fluid. That was one of the old ones as well. Here's one of the first punches I ended up doing. A little too much like activity to the right. Ended up changing it to where like there's a little more center of punch, a little more hip movement, and a lot more like draw back right before he flung his arm out. It ended up looking a lot better. Here's a Skull Crusher, one of his like animations for his attack moves. And as soon as like his fist would like hit that end there, right before they come back up, he explodes outward with some particle effects. It's a rough walk animation I did. It ended up just being like something to use as a transition. I never ended up having time to like really go back and rework it, but I think it did fine for what it was needed. Here was the start of the fire trap mesh that I worked on. This ended up being a lot more square rather than like this outward kind of shape that it has. But it's fairly straightforward. Four columns of circles, 4 rows of circles. I figured it would work fine. I knew that if I did, just edge loop cuts all the way across, it was gonna give me what I needed, and I just built the circles like that. And I knew they didn't need to be even or uniform, considering our theme was a diesel punk. It's kind of like post-apocalyptic world where things would be kind of like roughly built. And here's kind of what we ended up with. And from the circles is a fire particle that's emitted. Here's the textures that we ended up with. This is the fire trap. Show you the initial snapshot here. I kind of just filled this in. I knew that like the main focus would be the top, but the rest of the trap would actually be a kind of like tileable build. The circles just ended up being like colored in. The texture itself I edited briefly, just minor edits here and there, and placed it where the UV map was, and got a good looking result. Here's what we ended up with for the final texture of Mayhem. A lot of skin, a lot of metal, a lot of editing with the initial materials that were put in. His lips and eyes are there still, some of the skin, and you just ended up with this like, really rough kind of looking character. So that's some of the stuff that I ended up doing to help produce the game that we made for our class. Here's the actual game. I'm just going to show you briefly so you can see the character in action that I spent a lot of time working on. Here's Mayhem. So yeah, I mean, like the animations came out looking alright. I spent some time in Unreal. Most of it was just like importing assets to try and test them out, see how they worked. Mostly for the animation side of the project. Like once that came apart. Iron Armor, which is mostly particle effect. There's another one, animation that's mostly particle effect. There goes the Skull Crusher. That right there is the Highlander mech, for which I did like the initial character concept art and sketches. I'm gonna go check out a fire trap real quick. I think I saw one up here actually. Yeah, there it goes. Small little pads, but deadly. Alright, this is definitely like a lot of the stuff that I ended up getting done in Dieseland. There's a lot more work, obviously. You can see it all around me. A lot of other details that went into it. I just had a small hand in a very large project, and I'm glad and excited for the result, and I'm pretty proud of what we made. Thanks for watching.